The morning didn't break. It softened, as if the sky understood before we did. News moved through the city like a hush, crossing kitchen tiles and studio gates, riding the blue glow of phones into living rooms not ready for it. Diane Keaton was gone. 79 years brave, California sunlight still cooling on the windows of a house that had learned the sound of her footsteps. This wasn't one more headline in a crowded day. It was a pause that touched everything. Crews stood a little slower on soundstages. Old friends reached for words and found only breath. And strangers, people who'd been carried through hard seasons by a line she once tossed off like it was nothing, felt the air change in their own rooms. If you've ever found yourself steadier because she made being uncertain look like a kind of art, honor that. Tap like is a small candle for the work that saw you when you thought you were unseeable. Leave a simple R.A.P. Diane Keaton below, not for numbers but for the quiet way gratitude keeps a light on after the guests have gone. Her legend looks towering from here, but she didn't start as a statue. She started as a daughter of Los Angeles, with a last name that didn't yet weigh anything, learning early that houses can be loud with silence. The kitchen was performance, the hallway confession, the front door a curtain that made everything inside look polite from the street. There are families that talk until truth shows up by accident. Hers was not that climate. Feelings lived in the bone and never asked permission to knock, so she made a promise in a language only she could hear. I will grow bigger than my quiet. It's the kind of vow a child whispers into the dark when the dark feels heavy, but familiar. She didn't rebel with shouting. She rebelled with attention. She watched how people held themselves together and saw the seams, the places where laughter stayed a second too long, where the smile was careful because it had a job. She carried that map to New York, the way some people carry lucky coins. The bus coughed her into winter. Manhattan in a bad mood is simply honest. It has no patience for charm that isn't anchored to work. She rented the kind of apartment that teaches humility. A radiator that throbbed instead of warming. A window that hummed with the wind. Neighbors whose arguments became thin, unwanted lullabies. Daylight was a pale visitor that stood in the kitchen and said nothing. Nights tasted like tea and courage. To be young in a city that doesn't care is a fair test of desire. She took it daily. She answered with auditions that ended before the hope in them could thaw. To this, to that, not quite the thing. Notes that stick to your coat even after you've hung it up. When money shortened its breath, she fed it coins and jokes. She worked, she observed, she learned to hold the room with stillness when she couldn't yet hold it with status. And then one stage said yes, the kind of yes that sounds like a door opening into louder rooms. There are breaks and there are beginnings. They aren't always the same. Her first applause didn't change the size of her dream. It changed the temperature of her silence. You could feel it loosening, turning from a locked room into a kind of chamber where sound travels farther. If fear had been the engine, craft became the road. She studied the architecture of a moment, where the breath sits, how the eyes carry the sentence the mouth is pretending not to say, when to leave a space between words wide enough for the audience to walk through. So, when a young woman named Kay Adams stepped into the shadow of a family whose last name made men careful, Diane didn't play small. She played precise. Power needs witnesses. Innocence needs a clock. She gave the film both. Watch closely, and you'll see the quiet mathematics of her performance. How she registered absent things. Safety, certainty, the kind of love that doesn't ask a person to look away while it rearranges their life. She didn't outshout the legend beside her. She did something harder. She spoke soft and landed hard. Then came the role that looked like her and wasn't her, and was somehow exactly her. Open, surprising, braver than the mask of brave. Annie Hall didn't charm its way into permanence. It confessed. She wore clothes like sentences, long, clean, honest, and moved through each scene with the nerve to be off-center in the exact way real people are. It's not that she made awkwardness fashionable. She made truth look wearable. The award was a gold punctuation mark at the end of a paragraph that didn't beg to be finished. She took it home, set it down, and for a minute listened for the echo. Nothing mystical arrived, only the same work waiting. Success is a staircase with mirrors on both sides. Some actors get lost admiring angles. She kept climbing. She held 1,000 kinds of women without insulting any of them. Messy and meticulous, self-assured and undone, loud in laughter and quiet in sorrow. The trick was never to hide the seam. She let the cost show. You could sense the long nights under the jokes, the small ache inside the smile. That's why audiences took her personally. She made the camera an accomplice to honesty, and everybody watching felt like they were getting away with something tender. But the world saw only the constellation from a distance. The Godfather, Annie Hall, Reds, father of the bride, a glow that could light theaters on an ordinary weeknight. Up close, the work altered form. She memorized until the words knew her better than she knew them. She learned how to hear a scene's fragile pulse and adjust her own breathing to match. She trusted the part of silence that isn't emptiness. There are performers who fear the pause. She understood it as a kind of prayer. Nothing in that craft announced itself. She wasn't building monuments. She was building rooms, spaces where an audience could sit with complicated feelings and not be asked to tidy them. The more the industry tried to name what she did, the more she slipped into new names. It looked like reinvention from the press row. From inside, it was steadiness, the long practice of telling the truth at different temperatures. And yet, the higher the floors, the thinner the air. In the middle years, the applause followed her like weather, bright and changeable. Praise is a pleasant sound. It is not a compass. She learned to keep her hand on a different instrument. Discipline, habit, the small grit of showing up when inspiration is confused or late. Some projects opened like flowers, others opened like paperwork. She gave each the same attention, the same refusal to coast. That's how careers endure, not by magic. By the daily maintenance of a vow no one hears you make. When the spotlight felt hot enough to sting, she stepped sideways into rooms where there was no applause at all. Old roofs, patient beams, tile with a history of sunlight, the second language of her life. She listened to walls the way she listened to scripts, for what they were trying to become, if only someone would protect their memory. She peeled back a century's dust, nodded at the patience of wood, and returned light to places that had been living on shadows. This was not a hobby, it was devotion, the same quality that makes a performance honest. Only now the audience was a doorway learning how to breathe again. All of that, childhood weather, New York winters, small apartments with brave radiators, early yeses, late lessons, rooms rescued from time, stood quietly inside the star. Everyone thought they knew. The public story shines because it catches what reflects. The private story glows because it keeps you warm. She knew how to tend both without mistaking either for home. But the next chapter wasn't written in ticket sales or tile. It was the chapter people spoke of in half sentences and glances, a story that refused to end neatly, a tenderness that kept returning like a tide, even when the calendar pretended it had gone. There are romances that arrive like parades, and there are romances that arrive like a familiar key, sliding into a lock. It somehow never opened before. His name was already heavy with legend by the time their names were said together. But weight isn't the point of a key. Fit is. They fit not with fireworks that announce themselves from rooftops, but with the shy gravity of two intensities recognizing shelter in each other. On sets where everything is lit for clarity, they made shade for privacy. It wasn't secrecy. It was respect for the fragile way something beautiful grows when cameras are sleeping. They laughed the kind of laugh that doesn't prove anything to anyone. They cooked the kind of meals where garlic and confession share the same air. They didn't teach the world what it needed to know about love. They learned quieter lessons, how to sit in a room and let a silence count as presence, how to let someone else's genius make you braver instead of smaller, how to accept the strange fact that a great love can feel like a truce you sign every morning with your own doubt. They were not always close. And sometimes closeness isn't safety anyway. Fame has a way of multiplying distance and asking you to call it destiny. Careers move on different rails. Adorations run at different speeds. There were years when their paths braided themselves into something like a plan. There were years when the thread pulled thin and both of them pretended not to hear the snap. It's not that the world misread them. It's that the world prefers conclusions. They never gave it one. She told the truth about that. Not the gossipy truth, the human kind. She would say she was at her bravest when she said what she needed, and then listened to the answer, even if the answer was silence. She learned that silence can be a yes to the life you didn't expect to be living. Pain is still a teacher when it's polite, and some hearts are constructed less like bowls that hold and more like doorways that open and open and open, even when the house around them keeps changing. There is a moment lovers dread more than screaming. It's the clean moment, the gentle, nearly invisible minute, when the person you adore looks at you with everything except the one sentence you came to hear. That moment bends time. You stand inside it and feel years folding into themselves like paper. She stood in it with a grace that broke her and built her at the same time. Love wasn't failing. It was telling the truth about its form, not possession, not promise. Recognition, faithful in its way to what they had always been. Two artists protecting their flame, even when it meant living on opposite edges of its light. After the not quite ending that the world tried to rename as ending, life didn't fall apart. It unbraided. The house was still a house. The dog still trusted mourning. The line still needed learning. But the future had to be taught a new shape. She did not audition for a replacement story. She did something harder. She remained open, not to a headline, but to a deeper belonging that didn't require an audience to believe in it. Heartbreak is famous for its mess. Hers chose a slower instrument. The ache didn't scream. It settled. It lived in the fridge light at midnight, in the way a spoon taps the rim of a mug and then doesn't. It lived in long drives where the radio was softer than memory, and in the small, decisive act of throwing out a jar of something long expired. Because even sadness deserves a kitchen that is safe. She allowed herself to be tender without becoming breakable. That's a trick nobody teaches. It's a muscle you build in the dark. She worked. She laughed. Real laughter, not the performance of resilience that tries to convince the room. She told stories with her whole face. She went on sets and reminded scenes that the most interesting thing a human being can do on camera is tell the truth without announcing it. But in the quiet behind the work, she began a conversation with herself that would become the spine of the next act. What if the life I need is the life I choose without waiting for permission from a myth I keep retelling? What came next would be called brave, by people who like labels, and ordinary, by people who understand that ordinary is what saves us. She became a mother, not as a plot twist or a caption, under a red carpet photo, but as a daily practice of love that does dishes and repairs backpacks, and learns to hear joy in a slam of a teenage door, because it means the house is alive. Dexter first, then Duke. The language of her days shifted. The world would try to keep her on magazine time. Premieres, profiles, awards. But home has its own calendar. It marks growth with pencil lines on a doorway, and seasons with the way a certain sweater appears when mornings get honest. Motherhood didn't soften her edges. It sanded them into purpose. She gave interviews that sparkled the way she always did, but you could hear a new ease in the tone. The confidence of someone who knows that if the set goes badly, dinner still needs making, and that's its own small mercy. Love in this form didn't require bargaining with mystery. It asked for chores and stories and presents, and it gave back a steadiness that made the other rooms of her life more generous. People like to say you can have it all if you organize it perfectly. She never organized love that way. She allowed it to be untidy and true, and then she took that truth back to work. In those later performances where she feels like a friend you haven't met yet, you can sense what changed. The camera isn't a jury anymore. It's a companion. She invites it in. She lets it see laugh lines the industry wants blurred and lets it hear the breath that comes after the joke. The one that says, yes, it's funny to be human, and yes, it's heavy. And both of those things can sit in the same chair. The world assumes heartbreak ends when a new role begins. She didn't burn any evidence. She carried what mattered with tenderness. Love that refused to become a contract didn't become a villain. It became a ghost that helped her understand how to haunt a scene with the exact right amount of longing. If you've ever watched her look down, smile, and then look up as if she's searching your face for a permission slip you didn't know you had, that's the ghost teaching the lesson. The lesson is stay open, without begging the past to come back wearing a different hat. And somewhere inside all of that, she returned to her other ritual, restoring places the world forgot to thank. She took buildings that had been learning to give up and taught them patience again. There's something almost liturgical about it. Remove what time has piled up. Reveal what was beautiful before the neglect. Care for what will stand when you are not here to be proud of it. In a life that made public meaning, this was a private theology. She believed in shelter, literal and otherwise. The years picked up speed the way they do when a person finds a rhythm that knows their name. She worked because work kept her honest. She rested because rest kept her kind. She kept her circle close enough to hold and large enough to breathe. She learned to say no not as punishment, but as design. She said yes as a way of honoring the nervous girl in a cold apartment, who once promised a future she hadn't yet earned. And then the news arrived the way winter arrives in a city that remembers how to brace, sudden to the unprepared, gentle to the ones who had learned to listen for the quieting. The family kept the details where they belonged, which is to say, theirs. The rest of us were given what grief is meant to carry. Memory and gratitude, not gossip. The tributes came soft and stunned, full of studio nights and kitchen mornings, full of laughter that taught grown men how to be generous, and of scenes that made millions sit still and feel the exact size of their own weather. Somehow, a city used to noise made room for a silence that felt like love. In the end, the house she filled with ordinary light held the shape of her life better than any marquee ever could. The garden knew her footsteps. The floors knew the tempo of her mornings. On tables, stacks of photographs watched the windows. Black and white rooms inside rooms, her eye turning absence into architecture. She had designed spaces the way she designed moments on screen. Nothing wasted, nothing loud without reason. Everything invited to be honest under good light. Her children, grown enough to carry their own calm, did what the living always do when love asks for translation. They remembered her rituals out loud, so the air could practice keeping them. Tea that went cold because she got lost in a paragraph, and didn't mind. A dog that listened like an old friend. A porch that held the kind of laughter you don't stage because it doesn't perform well on command. They made their plans without spectacle. Grief doesn't fear cameras. It ignores them. Candles do their quiet work regardless. The industry, which loves to speak in capital letters, struggled to calibrate its voice. It tried on grand words like icon and era, and some of them fit because truth can be large without becoming clumsy. But the more accurate tributes came from the people who remembered specifics. Director who said she spun in place before a scene like a child greeting weather. The actor who said she made a joke that landed so precisely it fixed a broken afternoon. The crew member who said she knew his name by lunch and his kid's science project by Friday. Legacy collects trophies, love collects details. What did she give the camera that the camera couldn't have taken? Permission to let a wrinkle be a map instead of an emergency. To let a pause do work instead of filling it in with the fear that someone will think you don't know what you're doing. To let a woman talk like a person first. A symbol never. That's not ordinary. That's insurgent. She wasn't marching. She was staying in her own way of being until the world adjusted its lenses to focus on her wavelength. There's a line people like to quote about her refusal to be edited into anyone else's comfort. It lives in the way she dressed, in the stubborn elegance of a hat that looked like punctuation. It lives in the body of work that won prizes because it deserved them, and also won people who never cared about prizes because it told the truth about how exhausting and hilarious it is to be alive. If you gather all her characters in one room, They would not agree on anything except loyalty to their own weather. In an industry that prizes templates, she remained a human variable. And then there is the patient church of restoration. Houses lifted from collapse by hands that respected every nail. The sales were headlines because numbers make easy stories. The reality was devotional. Saving beams, preserving tile, choosing paint that remembered the first name of sunlight. She used success to become a custodian. She used privacy to become generous in ways that don't require applause. It's a good way to grow older, building things that will outlast the names carved in their deeds. As for age, she took it like she took laughter, full-faced. There was no pleading with time, only a negotiation with health that she handled in public as gently as she could. Candid when candor could help someone else breathe easier. Quiet when quiet was kindness to people who think disclosure and dignity are synonyms. She reminded a culture drunk on the idea of forever young, that still hears the more moving phrase. You can chart careers by decades, by awards, by colleague lists that look like family trees, or you can chart them by what they gave you on an afternoon when you didn't know you needed saving. Maybe you were young and the first breakup had made your apartment feel too big. She laughed a line that put oxygen back in the room. Maybe you were 40 and the mirror kept trying to be a judge. She smiled and turned toward the camera like she was turning toward you and seemed to announce without saying it, that the verdict was still beautiful because still alive. Maybe you were older and the country had grown loud with opinions. She built a small house of peace inside a scene, and for 2 minutes, you felt your shoulders forget their job. The day after the news, people who hadn't spoken in years found themselves sending the same message. Remember when she, and the sentence didn't need finishing because the memory did the rest. That's legacy without a capital L. It's not a museum, it's a bridge between strangers who discover they are less alone than they thought in the ways they needed help. If you want to honor her without imitating her, do one small thing the way she did, large things, bravely and kindly at once. Tell the truth, but leave the sharp edges in the drawer, unless they are necessary tools. Wear what makes you feel most like your own name. Laugh with your whole mouth, even when the day has been unhelpful. Learn the quiet geometry of a pause. Save a room if you can. Failing that, save a moment. And maybe tonight, make your own little revival. Pick one film. It doesn't have to be the obvious one. Find the scene where she surprises you even though you know what's coming. Notice how she doesn't hurry the emotion. Notice how she looks at someone else like she's making room for them to be fully themselves, and in doing so becomes fully herself. That's the trick. That's the craft. That's the gift wrapped so well you almost forget it's a gift. Then step outside for a minute. The air is still doing its job. The light is working the window like it always has. Somewhere, a neighbor is laughing at something small and good. Somewhere, a person you will never meet is making tea in a kitchen that suddenly feels like church because a memory decided to sit down and stay a while. Somewhere, in a town that only knows her from a poster on a dorm wall, two friends will watch a scene and say nothing for a full minute after the credits, because silence in the right hands says everything. She began in quiet and ended there, too. Not as punishment, as peace. The child who once learned to translate silence into story kept the promise. The artist who learned to keep still inside a hurricane taught the storm new manners. The mother who chose love when it asked for patience over spectacle raised days that hold. The woman who refused to become anyone else's idea of tidy turned a world full of mirrors into a place where windows felt safe again. If her work steadied you, thank her the way she would have preferred, by being a little more yourself than you were yesterday. If her courage warmed you, pass that warmth forward without announcing the transfer. If her laughter ever helped you find air, breathe deeper and share it. That's how light travels, palm to palm, scene to scene, house to house. Before we close, do the small ritual we reserve for artists who change the emotional weather of our lives. Press like not for a scoreboard, but as a nod across a crowded room. The kind of nod she'd notice because she was always noticing. And if a role of hers once helped you stand back up, write its name below. Someone will watch that scene tonight because you mentioned it. In that way, the work keeps working. The light keeps walking, and the woman who never begged for our attention goes on earning it, one honest breath at a time.